Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So this is a continuation of the series which we are going on, that is the abdomen in a nutshell. In that particular abdomen in a nutshell, we have seen the various organs which we are discussing earlier. We have seen the stomach, then we have seen the duodenum. And similarly in that context, I've made this video so that you can understand another organ in a simple form. And one thing new I've tried in this is that I've made this in through my own diagrams. And so please pardon me as I'm not so well in drawing diagrams, but in replace of the PPTs, I've made some sheets over here and I will write some notes over here so that I can explain you in a live session. So let's see that this type of change, whether you are liking or not. So please give the feedback and the suggestions which are been very much helpful for me. So starting with this, that is the spleen. Now, spleen is the largest lymphoid organ in the body. So we have to write this, that the key points which you are writing, that it is the largest lymphoid organ. Now we will see some of the functions of it. So the first function which you will see over here, that will be that the main function what we have to understand over here is that spleen act as a graveyard of RBCs. So we will write this point, that it acts as a graveyard of RBCs. With this, what we understand that the worn out RBCs will we get filtered through the spleen. Secondly, what we have to remember is that in the fetal life, it helps in manufacture of the RBCs and lymphocytes. So we will write it in fetal life. It helps in the manufacture of RBCs. So this point also you have to remember that it helps in the manufacture of the RBCs. The third point, that it provides immunity. Obviously, it is a lymphoid organ, so it will produce the lymphocytes. So it will give the it will give us the immunity to fight against the diseases and the various causing pathogens which are entering our body. So if you have to remember over this, that it produce for immunity, it is producing IgM. You have to remember this point. So, and this obviously it's a lymphoid organs, it has the lymphocytes, and lymphocytes clone are known as the plasma cells. So it is been made by plasma cells. Now we will see about the where this organ is located. So moving on to the location. Okay, so the spleen is located in the left hypochondrium between the fundus of the stomach and the diaphragm, behind the mid-axillary line, opposite to the 9th, 10th and 11th rib. As now you see in this diagram, as you can clearly see that this part is known as spleen. This line which is going on is known as the mid-axillary line. Look, in this diagram we have made the abdomen part over here, and we can see the 9, the 10, the 11th and the 12th ribs. And what is been mentioned, that it is present between the fundus of the stomach and the diaphragm. So here it is present of spleen. Obviously what that is spleen is here, so we will see that this part is our left side and this is the right part of the body. So in between the diaphragm and the stomach, it is actually present. So this spleen, this structure is present there also. Now what we will see, that this is the main structure which we have formed. If we see about the size, the shape and the color of the spleen, so we move on to this. According to that, first we will classify the spleen into different shapes. So this is our classification. Now If we will see the classification, so the classification, the first point which we have to see is that this is the wedge shaped, which is present actually in 44% of the we say the individuals, and we can say this is the wedge shaped. Then this particular part is your gastric impression, this part having the renal impression, this having the intermediate border. What we have to understand over here, the spleen has some visceral surface, and in this visceral surface some visceral organs having their impressions. So moving on to that point of view, if we see, then this the another point is the tetrahedral, which is the 42% over there, and then we have the which is actually well formed. If we see as like that, so as the orange segment has been said for the wedge shape, the tetrahedral is 42% is present over there, and the lastly is the triangular shape, which you can see over here. So this triangular shape is 14%, and from here onward, whatever the impressions which you will see about, that is the gastric impression or the renal impression or the intermediate border, or we see the colic impression. So I've made some short forms so that we can have some time also there, and we can complete this topic fastly. So IB is here the intermediate border, this is the gastric impression, this is the renal impression. Similarly for this gastric impression, renal impression, IB. Now what more we have to understand over here is that if we see the measurements of the spleen which is located over here, so in that particular point we have to remember that the different measurements are like that. We can write over here the measurements if you will see. So it can be remembered by Harris dictum of odd numbers. Harris dictum of odd number, and that is your 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 and 11. Now what these numbers indicating over here, we have to remember that. तो यहाँ पर जो नंबर हमने देख रहे हैं 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 and 11, what is this here? So the summarizing the all the statistics or the measurement which you have to remember of the spleen, as like it measures 1 inch in the thickness, 3 inches in the breadth. So this is the breadth part, this is the 5 inches, the 5 inches the length, and the 7 is actually 7 ounces and actually the weight. And if you see, it lights deep to the 9th, 11th, and similarly there is also the 10th. So this last part is your ribs, and these are your dimensions, that the 1 inch is the your thickness, and the 3 inches is your breadth, and the 5 inches is your length. So similar in that way we can remember this part. And now we have to also remember that there are some surface projections of spleen which we can see. So in the surface projection, as I have seen, that there are some the impressions, the renal impressions, the gastric impression, the that is the your in this tetrahedral, if you will see, the tetrahedral in the 42% it is well formed, this triangular, this all the part which you are seeing over here. So it comes like that only. So we have to remember that point. And the surface projection said that the spleen is marked on the surface on the left side of the back of the trunk, and its long axis correspond to that of the 10th rib. Means this spleen which we are seeing over here, this long axis which is passing, it corresponding to the 10th rib, means corresponding to 10th rib there is a long axis, that is first surface projection. Now the second, if you see, the lower border of the 9th rib correspond to the lower border of the 11th rib. Means the upper border, if we can see over here, as you can see in the external features which will come after this, the superior border, the upper border actually corresponds to the 9th rib, and the lower border is actually corresponding to the 11th rib. Similarly, it is lying medially about 5 cm from the posterior midline of the body. As we have seen over here, this is the mid axillary line, so there is also posterior middle line, and through there it is actually medially 5 cm present over there. And the T10 vertebra and the lateral end of the maxillary actually we can also remember over there. Now one more point which are in this inset which we want to focus is that this is the T10 vertebra. This is the T10 vertebra. This spleen is what? So this is spleen corresponding to the long axis of the 10th rib, as I mentioned, that corresponding to the 10th rib, there is the long axis of the spleen. So with that particular point, if you will see, then it is making an angle of 45 degree with the horizontal plane. So actually through this angle also some authors have mentioned about the spleen, like there is an anterobasal angle which is the junction of the superior border, that is the superior border, with the anterior end, means this is superior border and the anterior end which is actually the over here. So it is making an angle over here, as we can see that this is the superior border. So here we can see this some angle is present. It is known as the anterobasal angle. The second is the posterobasal angle, and the anterobasal angle is also called the clinical angle of spleen because it is felt first when the spleen is enlarged. So if we see there is a presence of splenomegaly is there, so we can see there is a increase in the particular angle which we can see over here. Now after this, the relocating and the surface relation, we are moving over here to the external features. So external feature we see, then there is divided into the two ends, the anterior, the posterior, the three borders, the superior, inferior, and the intermediate, the two surfaces, the diaphragmatic and the visceral surface. Now moving on to that, the anterior end is broad and it is more like a border and directed downward, forward and to the left. The anterior border is directed downward, leftward, and it is actually forward. The posterior end is blunt and rounded. As like you see over here, this is the end, the posterior end is actually somewhat rounded in this and is blunt in shape, and it is directed upward, backward and medially. As you can see that it is directed upward, backward and medially. Now we see the borders, the superior border, the inferior border and the intermediate border. The superior border has a characteristic presence of two notches. As you can see, there are the presence of two notches in the superior border, and if we see this indicates the spleen develops by the fusion of separate masses of lymphoid tissue. So this notches are actually saying that there is a lobulated development of the spleen. Now the inferior border separates the visceral surface from the diaphragmatic surface. So this inferior border, if you see, it is separating the visceral surface from the diaphragmatic. So actually it is having two surfaces I have mentioned over here, diaphragmatic and the visceral. So according to with that you have to remember this point. And the intermediate border is rounded and separates the gastric impression from the renal impression. So this intermediate border which you can see over here, this is separating from the gastric and the renal impression which is formed over there. So we will see it in more detail thereafter. The surfaces are the diaphragmatic surface and the one is the visceral surface. Diaphragmatic surface is actually convex and smooth, you can see, and the visceral surface having the gastric impression, the renal impression, as I mentioned over here, the gastric, the renal impression, the colic impressions, and the renal impressions, the colic and the pancreatic impressions also. So through this all the impressions are actually in the visceral side of that. So you have to remember that particular point. Now after this we will move on to the relations. So this is our relations. Now relations is actually divided into your peritoneal and the visceral relations. Now quickly moving on to the peritoneal relations. So this is the point that is you have to remember, the peritoneal relations. The two main points which you have to focus over here is the gastrosplenic ligament and the lienorenal ligament. What are these? We will look upon this. So the spleen is completely enclosed in the peritoneum except at the hilum through which the splenic artery and all the vessels are actually entering over there. And it is having peritoneal fold, having two peritoneal folds which extend, one to the stomach and other to the left kidney. And this both are known as the gastrosplenic and the, so these are actually peritoneal fold, this gastrosplenic ligament and lienorenal ligament. Now with the gastrosplenic ligament, what you have to remember the structures extending from the hilum of the spleen to the upper one third of the greater curvature of stomach, and it containing the short gastric vessel or the artery. This is the short gastric artery. Now the second is lienorenal ligament. With that we have to remember the tail of the pancreas. As you can see over here, this is the tail of the pancreas, and also we have to remember that there is splenic vessels and pancreatico lymph nodes. These are the pancreatic lymph nodes. This you can see the lienorenal ligament is enclosing this all thing, the kidney, the splenic arteries and the your pancreatic lymph nodes. So you have to remember this all the points. And another ligament is also present, the phrygonocolic ligament. It is a triangular fold of peritoneum extending from the left colic flexure of the diaphragm opposite to the 10th rib. So it's a one more point you have to remember, that there is presence of pericolonic ligament. Now the visceral dilation occurs in the fundus of the stomach, the anterior surface of the left kidney, the left colic flexion, the tail of pancreas. And for the visceral surface, if you will see, so we have actually given over here this, it is having gastric impression. This particular part is having the your pancreatic impression, the gastric impression, and this particular part, if you will see, this is having the renal impression, and the colic impression is also present over there. So through this you can remember the visceral relations. So with the visceral, you will say it is fundus of the stomach, it is having the left colic flexion, and the tail of the pancreas. Okay, and similarly with the diaphragm, if you will see, the diaphragmatic surface is related to the diaphragm, separating it from the costophrenic recesses of the 9 to 10 11th rib. So these are the 9 to 11th rib, and it is separating the spleen from the diaphragmatic recesses. So through this we have completed. Now we are moving to the arterial supply of spleen. We are moving to the vascular system of the spleen. So if you have to remember, the spleen is supplied by splenic artery, and it is the largest branch of your celiac trunk, and we have mentioned this in your stomach also. So with that we can remember over here that from the celiac trunk it is coming the splenic artery. It traverses through the linear ligament to reach the hilum of the spleen, where it divides into the 5 or more branches. As you can see, it is having 5 or more branches in the hilum. So this is about that. And the splenic artery is remarkably tortuous, means it is in tortuosity. Because of that, it is allowing the movement of the spleen to fall in distension of stomach and movement of diaphragm. मीन्स कि स्टमक और डायफ्राम की अगर अपन देखते हैं डिस्टेंशन, अगर उनके साइज बढ़ रहे हैं तो उसके क्योंकि स्प्लीन तो हमको पता है कि स्टमक और डायफ्राम के पीछे तरफ पोस्टीरियर पार्ट में प्रेजेंट है, तो ये इसकी टॉर्चुसिटी के कारण क्या होता है, वो जो है वो ब्लॉकेज नहीं आती अपने आर्टरीज में, और चूंकि वो नहीं आती ब्लॉकेज आर्टरीज, तो हमारा जो स्प्लीन को जो आर्टरियल सप्लाई जो है वो प्रॉपर तरीके से मेंटेन रहता है. सो वो आपको ध्यान रखना है. एंड दिस इज ऑल अबाउट द आर्टरियल सप्लाई. ओके.